Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. I am really incredibly honored to have the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker today, who, if you read your invitations and all the promotions, you already know it is Kevin Bunker of Developers Collaborative. So I won't keep that a secret, but I do want to say a few things about Kevin before we call him up here to talk. The first time I met Kevin was in 2016, right after I, as a brand new counselor, probably been a counselor for about 6 weeks, blocked a development of a CVS on Forest Avenue. It was going to be kind of a cookie cutter CVS, big parking lot, and I heard a lot of complaints from my constituents and did what I needed to do to make sure that development that was going to happen there was in line with what we envisioned. So Kevin reached out and wanted to talk about a way to maybe make this development work. And I was skeptical, but in true Kevin Bunker style, he had found a way to make it work. He was talking about using a store like CVS as an anchor tenant and building housing above it, and suddenly you see the vision, and it is something that fits really well on a transit corridor. And as he was showing me kind of the plans and what he was thinking, I noticed that he was left-handed. I am left-handed. Do we have other left-handers in the audience? Yeah, so left-handers, you know it makes a difference. Right-handers, don't worry, it doesn't make a difference. But I saw that, and then he asked me how the zoning stood right now, like what did I do to stop the development and where did it stand? And I said, well, it's kind of in limbo. And he said, you mean like a sword of Damocles? And I thought, oh my God, left-handed, to the point, making literary references. This is a kindred spirit. So I was pretty thrilled to meet him, and he offered a lot of wisdom that day about how you can build affordable housing. And then I just kind of watched Kevin from my council perch over the next several years, and I was incredibly impressed with all of the work that he did. One of the first projects that I think came before the council while I was on it was the Reed School, which had fallen into disrepair, and he was doing the redevelopment of it into market rate apartments. But as a first phase, he was working to renovate another building on the parcel to serve as a nonprofit school for children with learning disabilities, the Children's Odyssey. And so right away, he was combining this kind of nonprofit and private partnership going together and making sure that the developments that he was doing were also having a positive impact. Another example was the Rosa True building. It was an elementary school that closed in 1972. It was a historic building. It had fallen into disrepair under previous owners, and Kevin and his company came in and restored it, and for that, they received a Maine Preservation Honor Award. The Mother House, you guys are probably familiar with, right off of Forest, Stevens, that kind of area. That became 88 apartments for seniors. It faced a lot of challenges, but Kevin is tenacious and got this project through so that there were 66 affordable and 22 market rate apartments in this beautiful, beautiful building. And it has already received Greater Portland Landmarks Preservation Award and a Maine Preservation Honor Award. One of the projects that I think I found most impressive was Freedom Place, which is one that initially, this was I think 66 State Street is the address. Initially it was going to be converted to be market rate condos, but the organization Amistad had a presence in that building, and Kevin got to know Brian Townsend of Amistad while he was getting ready to work on it, was really impressed with the work that they did in the community, and so converted the idea for the project for market rate condos to, I want to get a single room occupancy lodging facility for women in recovery, and Amistad provides the management there. So he took a project that he was looking at, saw the need in the community, and changed the project around, again, for the benefit of the community. The completed renovation of the building resulted in 38 individual units with common gathering, cooking areas and bathrooms on each floor. And it's a rare example of anti-gentrification, right? Taking a project that's right in the heart and making sure that it stays affordable and is really serving a purpose for the community. So Kevin's been involved in numerous other affordable housing and preservation projects. You've probably read in the news recently the apartments that are going in Brunswick to help with asylum seekers, and also working to stand up some emergency beds in the Portland area. So I could go on and on about Kevin's projects and his financial acumen. But really what stands out to me about Kevin is his tenacity and his heart. When Kevin is in, he is in, and he will find a way to make something happen for the good of the community. The Homeless Services Center in Portland really speaks to this. I'm not sure another developer could have accomplished that project and could have gotten it standing up and ready to go and under budget, on time, early and under budget. And he had to withstand a lot of questions, a lot of neighborhood concerns, and even a referendum. And he stuck with it and got it through. So that's tenacity. And then if you look at his website for his company, Developers Collaborative, it speaks to his heart. This is directly from the DC website. At Developers Collaborative, our core values are based on the belief that a developer has great responsibility. The ways that we intervene in the built environment will affect people's lives for a long time. We feel all developers owe it to their respective communities to do more than just make a piece of land or a building generate the highest short-term financial return possible. And then I found this quote, which I really hope is an accurate quote. We know sometimes people get it wrong, but it sounds like Kevin to me, so I think it's probably real. He said to someone who was interviewing him, "We're not allergic to making money, but you can make a good living in real estate and still do things that make you feel good." So I'm incredibly impressed and really happy to introduce to you today this wonderful developer and someone I call friend, Kevin Bunker.
I don't know what there is left for me to say after that, but I'll do my best. So, and are we still at 40 minutes? You behind, ahead? Roughly 40 minutes with questions? Yeah, okay. I'm gonna set a little timer here so I try not to go over. Never know quite what I'm gonna say until I say it, so. But yeah, I definitely appreciate that. I'd forgotten the sword of Damocles comment. I don't even remember it now, but I believe that I did say that. And I actually got that property under contract after speaking with Belinda to try to build that CVS with the housing above it, and was able to get CVS on the phone to say, yeah, we're in, we'll do that. And I didn't have any experience with national retail tenants or anything like that at that time. Still don't have much. But they stopped picking up the phone once I got it under contract. So I lost a $5,000 option on that deal, and that was it, but I tried. So today I'm going to talk about some of those projects and maybe some other things. I have a little bit of a theme, maybe not a huge theme, but I'm just going to jump right in. So a quick overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about DC. Belinda already did some of that. I'll stress some of the same themes and some different ones. And then what I'm going to talk about is some of our projects, our recent projects that maybe you're interested in and certainly are in Cumberland County. I know Cumberland County is not an exact overlap for GPCOG, but it's close enough for government work, and we're government, so we're going to do that. And I think a lot of these projects are just really good ways to look at some of the housing issues that you all and me and others are grappling with every day, and they've mostly already been mentioned since I've been in the room. And then there's always this thing of what can my community do to attract development, to attract housing. I think this part of the talk is less important than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I think communities have gotten much better at working with developers and trying to figure out how to incentivize housing and kind of get all on the same page. So I'm going to skip through some of that pretty quickly because I think the communities that don't know how to do that are becoming more and more the exception as opposed to the rule. But I still think it's worth talking about. And I want to leave a little time for Q&A because I never want to presume what's interesting to the group. So mission, you already heard about a mission. You don't need to hear more about a mission. But one of the things that I like to think about some of the projects I've been interested in lately is building social infrastructure through housing. Been in my career now about 17 years and been trying to innovate and learn and stay on a learning curve that whole time. I don't just like to get in a lane, get comfortable, and then do that forever. Of course, that's the most profitable thing to do, is to learn a business really well, get to be one of the best at it, and just stay in that lane. And so we have lanes that we do stay in, like affordable housing, where we've become sort of a leader. Historic preservation's another. So we don't want to give up those lines of business, but I get bored, with just doing the same thing again and again. So I try to learn new things. And as I've advanced in my career and built out more of a team, me personally, I'd like to get involved in some of these social infrastructure projects. And if you're looking ahead, you might already be stuck on this communism thing. So I just wanted to, I was at a walkthrough of a property, and we were walking through with some groups. And Portland thing, the message is always a little bit different in Portland than everywhere else. And there are some Portland people here. But, I like to joke about communism when I'm in Portland because, frankly, there are quite a few communists in Portland. That's okay. There's some good. Is that uncomfortable or really funny? A little of both. But anyway, I was introduced. They said, say who you are and what you're doing, and I said, I'm Kevin Bunker, Developers Collaborative, and we bring capitalism to the people. And that's kind of how I think about it, because I'm a capitalist, certainly unabashed capitalist, but some of the critiques of capitalism are true, just like a lot of the critiques of communism are true, and like a lot of things, the truth is somewhere in between. And if you don't sort of moderate the excesses of capitalism, you have this sort of Koch brothers free market. The highest moral good is to place money where it'll earn its highest return, irrespective of any of the effects. And that's just not how I think about it. I think that there has to be capitalism has to be guided. It has the ability to raise living standards like no other form of living that we have, but at the same time, it has excesses, and if unchecked, it'll lead to a lot of bad distributional and other outcomes. So I don't know that there is a system that will do that. There's a lot of fighting about politics and systems, again, in Portland, a lot of that. But to my mind, it has to happen at the individual level. People have to understand what they're doing with the tools that they have. And being a developer, like she said, we do have a lot of tools at our disposal. We have the ability to do a lot of bad and a lot of good. And so I think we have to be a little bit enlightened about how we do that. DC in a nutshell, we do a bunch of different product types. We are probably 3/4 housing, half of that's affordable, half of that's market rate. We do some commercial buildings, do a lot of historic redevelopment, sort of have kind of the 80-20 rule where most of the work is in affordable housing and most of the money is not. We've done about 25 completed projects in Cumberland County, invested about $250 million, which is shocking to me when I had to add it up for a recent RFP for Jim Gailey back there. Jim, where's Jim? There he is, by the coffee. Don't eat all my whoopie pies. 863 units of housing we've done in Cumberland County, in process or complete. So the housing topics I'm going to talk about through the lens of real estate projects is affordability at both ends of the spectrum, the opioid crisis, homelessness, and then the asylum seeker issues we're having right now. So Stevens Square, that's really about affordability. Stevens Square is interesting because it has several phases. It's kind of a mixed-use campus. One of the phases is Stevens Square at Baxter Woods, which is condominiums. Market rate, very expensive, $500 a foot. These are $700,000, $800,000 condominiums, which is not my favorite thing to build. I don't love doing it, but it's kind of what the site wants and needs to be to make everything work, and people keep buying them, so I'm building them. But my favorite piece on that campus is not the mother house, which you saw a couple slides ago. That was my favorite piece for a while. That's how I got involved in the project. Ended up buying out the other developer. But my favorite piece is the community center, which is the old Macaulay School and then became the Maine Girls Academy, which was supposed to stay as the Maine Girls Academy throughout my ownership. They had a 50-year lease, and then they went bankrupt while I was in the process of closing on the property. So we, over a 3-year process during COVID, we converted it into daycare, a gymnasium. We have office space, a fitness center, and all kinds of interesting things going on there, including a cafe. And then also on campus, we have a pool that's in the fitness center, and we have nuns. We still have nuns on the campus. And those are in the building right across from on St. Catherine's on Walton Street, right across from the main entrance. This is the master plan. Does this have a laser pointer on it? No. No, okay. So the kind of square buildings there, those are buildings 2 through 5. Condominiums, building 1 in the upper right, that's built, red ink there. And then just to the left of that, building 2 is under construction. You'll see that in a minute. The figure 8 with a tail there to the right, that's gray, that's the mother house. And then down to the bottom right, that double rectangle thing there is the Stevens Square Community Center. And that's Stevens Ave on the right, Evergreen Memorial Park across the street, and Baxter Woods immediately to the south. This is building 2, condominium building 2. Everything on the campus 55 plus, by the way. So we've got market rate housing selling for very high prices right next to rental affordable housing renting for very low prices. So it's definitely a true mixed income campus. Moving on to the opioid crisis. This project's pretty near and dear to my heart. Belinda already spoke about it, so I don't need to go down and go through it again. But the fun thing about this one is we are talked about awards. We're receiving a Merida Notable Project Award for that right now as we speak. And Laura Reading, who was involved in the project, is going up and getting the award on our behalf. And my daughter texted me. My daughter's interning with me this summer, and she said, "Daddy, they're making me go up on stage with her." So she's going up to get the award, and that's pretty cool. And she's a little bit of a part of the story, which you could read about if you Google it and watch the videos or read the articles. But it's the capitalism to the people thing is maybe a little bit ostentatious, but the financial tools used to pull this thing off made my head spin. Very complex, a lot going on. And usually those tools are in service of much bigger projects to make a lot more money. In this case, we use these complicated financial tools just to make something work. And this building hasn't hit its projections yet, so unfortunately I haven't turned a profit on it yet. But maybe someday it will. But in the meantime, I think there's some good things happening there, so that's pretty cool. Homeless Services Center, it was a pretty high-profile project, so I think that most of you may know something about it, but again, it was a big community process. Stood on the shoulders of a lot of hard work by other people. John Jennings doesn't get nearly the credit that he deserves for being the one to help make this happen. And we opened it up in about 13 months, and we did give some money back to the city. So if you're in a town, your developer is telling you that they have COVID delays and COVID overruns, that might be true, but deals are still getting done. So it's important to keep pushing. Chinbro was a big part of that as well. Here are just a couple more pictures of some of the medical, looks like a staff room on the left, and then the kind of atrium middle entryway of the building on the right. Beautiful building. DC Brunswick Landing, this is another one. Capitalism to the people, here I am saying it again. This was a initiative I was working on with the state early on. How do we house some asylum seekers? How do we get housing built quickly? And the first idea was buy a hotel and convert it. We were talking with a hotel owner in one of your towns, working on it. Didn't work, didn't make sense. So the next step was, let's find approved projects that have already been through a public process, and you just need to sort of pull the building permit and go, as opposed to having to come up with the idea de novo and go through the whole process. And that led us to this project in Brunswick, which was out at the landings. It's a flurry of development by various for-profit developers, basically throwing up houses and apartment buildings just as fast as they can. And we were able to come to agreement to buy the land rights to these units with the approvals and everything at a price that worked for us. And it kind of worked for the developer too, because that was right when interest rates were trying to spike. And knowing the financials of these buildings like I do, I own some market rate ones, and I know kind of what the debt basis has to be to have them work. And this project might have been in trouble if they didn't find an out. Maybe not, but I think it was a good opportunity to come in and capture something that would have just been a market rate building and dedicate it for 2 years to asylum seekers. So we separated into 2 phases, 60 units, 12 units per building. So we've got a 24 unit, 2-building phase, and a 36 unit, 3-building phase. And one of those, the underlying regime for tenure, is market rate housing. And the other one, the underlying affordability, is 80% AMI and 50% AMI. And of course, when you have affordability, it drives less debt. So when you're trying to come up with a capital stack of $13 million, you have to really think about these things from a capital stack perspective. How are you going to balance your sources and uses? And the more affordability and the more things get sort of foisted upon you that you're trying to achieve, the less capital from outside sources you can attract. So we had to have a market rate phase that could drive comparatively high amount of debt, to fill the capital stack. And then the other one, we could achieve some more affordability, drives much less debt. And that was sort of sized to the amount of money that we were able to attract from Maine Housing and the governor's office to fill the budget. So over the top of that permanent affordability, there's sort of a 2-year umbrella agreement to house homeless asylum seekers, which will stay in place at least 2 years. There's money in escrow to pay their rent, so they obviously don't have money for rent. And we draw down on that escrow as we fill the units. And then Maine Housing has the optionality to keep that agreement going if the crisis is still going, if the political will is there, what have you. Or if not, they can let that layer fall away and then the underlying affordability happens. So even if they only do it for 2 years and the asylum seekers move on or the crisis is over, hard to imagine now, but if that's the case, you're still going to have permanent affordability in 36 of those units that wouldn't have been there before, which is nice. So the overwhelming demand, I talking to Kristen and Aaron back there from the city the other day, they're having 10 new people arrive per day in Portland. And so we're building these 60 units, and by the time they're built, there will have been far more people who have arrived than can fill these units. We simply can't build units fast enough. We can't build facilities fast enough. The answer has to come from a level other than the level that all of us are playing at. And so the federal government at some point is going to have to do something, whatever your politics are, good, bad, or indifferent. It's simply unsustainable, but we're doing what we can. That's sort of the starfish on the beach analogy, and it feels good to know that the people that get helped in the buildings that I do maybe are lucky ones, comparatively lucky, but it could make some real changes in people's lives, and that's what feels good. DC Blueberry, this one's a little bit controversial. This is a second shelter we're working on. This is for asylum seekers. We were awarded $4 million from Maine Housing. We found a location on Blueberry Road. Subsequently, didn't have this on my 2023 bingo card, but we had a waste company, Eco Maine, send a letter to the city about environmental justice. They were concerned about the environmental justice aspects of asylum seekers in an industrial building, and it may have had something to do with the fact that they wanted the building and were negotiating, and then when we got it under contract, they couldn't get it. But we'll see if they stay involved in the environmental justice movement now that we've moved on from that building, so stay tuned on that. But in any case, that building didn't work out, and we're looking for other options now, and reporters are hounding me trying to find out where, and I haven't told them, so I can't tell you either, but stay tuned. This is the Safe in Maine project that Belinda was talking about. This is kind of an interesting one because it blends the Maine housing world and the traditional Maine housing world. Maine housing is involved in a lot of this asylum seeker finance housing that I'm able to do, but the traditional Maine housing development world is low-income housing tax credits and those sorts of programs. And this is an attempt to blend those two programs together rather than raising a huge capital campaign to raise $30, $40 million, depending on how big the project is. This shows about 150 to 200 units. If you can leverage the tax credit program, you can drastically reduce the need for a capital campaign, and that's what Belinda and I are working on, and that work continues. This is Jim's project. Apologize, no graphics. We haven't got the building yet, but just wanted to point out that we don't just do housing. This isn't necessarily viewing the lens of one of those problems, but the social infrastructure piece or the infrastructure piece is important because the county needs new headquarters. They need good headquarters. They need, they want to attract staff that's interested in coming to work and has an office building that's a nice place to be. And so we put our hats in the ring to be their developer, and we were selected, which is something we're super excited about and just beginning to work on now. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, talk about housing, begin this talk about how can you get housing in your community. But I wanted to mention that the governor and the state is really doing their part to incentivize housing. You all know about some of the legislation that has been passed and continues to be passed. Won't get into that too much, but some really landmark legislation that's been passed in the past couple of years, and maybe some municipalities here are salty about it because it does take some local control away potentially, and I think it remains to see how it plays out, but I haven't analyzed it to know really what the net result of it will be, but the point is there's a strong contingent of folks in Augusta that have power right now that care about housing, and I think that's the takeaway. So in the governor's recent budget proposal, she's proposed another $80 million total for housing. the Rural Affordable Program, which is a really nice flexible program that a lot of communities that have trouble attracting traditional low-income housing tax credit developers can use. It's very easy to use, very simple. We're actually looking for projects in some of your towns. So it's not usable in Portland, South Portland, and I think Westbrook, but it's usable probably in most of the others that are here. And so I think there's some real promise there over 2 years. Then some more subsidy for the LIHTC program, which is, we could talk all day on, but I won't get into that too much. And 10 more million for so-called special projects. But the thing that's important to understand here, it's real easy to say there's $80 million for housing and everyone cheers, but at a certain point, it's like printing money, like we just got done doing. You can't really print your way out of a crisis. You can't necessarily, the more money you dedicate to housing, the more money you push into the top of the funnel, the more it costs to get a unit coming out of the bottom of the funnel. And right now, even the developers are super busy, but the Maine housing people are busy, the bankers are all busy, the architects. I had an architect who'd been chasing my work for a while say, I can't take your work. I called him for a project. He said, I'm too busy. Contractors are very busy. Subcontractors are super busy. So at a certain point, shoving more money at housing is simply going to increase the price of that housing. And there's some curves and graphs and math you can do to try to figure that out. But on the ground, I can tell you that it's a very real thing. And so while that money is very helpful and it's great, and I'm glad we have it, the sort of unsexy, hardworking, longer systemic solutions like workforce development and business attraction and all the things that you talk about, think about, and work on are critical to long-term regional health, just like developers sort of waving a wand and building housing. That's a big part of it, but without all the other pieces, we can't really be the region I think that we want to be. So this is a shameless recycling. Laura Reading, who is my director of affordable housing, was in Cape Elizabeth recently and did a presentation. And the presentation was basically about what can communities do to incentivize housing and what are the types of tools that they should look at. And I just thought this was useful. We have a couple interns at the office this summer. One of them is my daughter Alex, and the other one is a kid named Nate Rogers. And Nate is just on fire for real estate. He used to send me PowerPoints and PDFs and numbers of developments that he would sort of make up in his head and draw on SketchUp at school. And the last person that did that became one of my best employees. And it's just amazing how smart and how dedicated somebody can be when they get on fire for something at an early age. I didn't figure out what I wanted to do till I was 30, and I was pretty useless in a professional capacity at that age, but he was great. So anyway, I threw him Laura's PowerPoint and threw him one page of ideas, and in a day he had most of this PowerPoint pulled together. So if you like the way it looks, thank me. If you think it's got mistakes in it, blame the intern. But anyway, the next slides are directly from Laura's presentation, and they were sort of tailored to Cape Elizabeth, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them, but they're just indicative of processes that you can look at in your community to maybe come up with some ideas. So how can my community get some? That's the only thing I did change because we're talking about the money and the projects and the housing. So the number one thing that you have to think about in learning how developers think and how they choose where to come and where housing wants to be, as expressed by the free market, is the cost and availability of construction, the cost and availability of land. I don't think any of you can really control interest rates. That's the other big one. There's grant money that reduces the net cost of capital and the capital stack, and so it's not completely true, but generally what you can control as a community is the cost and availability of land. And not so much construction, but you can affect that a little bit. But with land, you might have municipal land you can put out to RFP. You might look at where your infrastructure is, building on the smart growth idea. If you have public water and sewer near a field, maybe that shouldn't be agricultural. Maybe the agricultural should be where there aren't utilities. Maybe you shouldn't build new utilities to raw land out in the countryside. But if there's good zoning, i.e. good density, i.e. many units per acre, that amortizes the cost of land over more units. That leads to affordability. Now, the cost of land is important, but the cost of infrastructure is usually more important than the cost of land. When we look at projects, we might want to pay raw land in, pick a town, $7,000 to $10,000 per unit of raw land. We know we're going to pay $30,000 for infrastructure. So infrastructure costs are probably 3 times as important, at least, as the cost of land. both of those are affected by density, zoning, and whether or not you decide to put parcels out for housing. Cost of construction, really, again, you don't control that. That's sort of a free market thing. But there are things you can do. Look at different housing typologies. You may have zoning that doesn't allow you to do attached housing, that may not allow you to do multifamily, different things like that. Community process. This is a slide Laura had done to demonstrate what the target populations in Cape Elizabeth might be, and it's really the same thing we always hear. Young adults need housing. We want them to stay in Cape Elizabeth. Young families, seniors, where are they going to live? You know, kind of the same stuff we have everywhere. Talked about housing typologies a little bit, and then communities actually can invest by putting land into a deal or putting a TIF district in place. Talked about that a little bit, moving on. This is a slide that she did to talk about alternate density standards for senior housing. Now, I know some towns, probably a lot of towns maybe in this audience and certainly in GP-COG have done this, but not every town has. And there are towns like York Village, Wyndham, Kennebunk. I know certainly Topsom has a really good senior housing density bonus that I've taken advantage of before. That's not in GP-COG, but there are things that you can look at that will allow senior housing on parcels where maybe family housing is maybe the other main type that you would have in your ordinance would not be able to be feasible because they couldn't be as dense. But senior housing, pretty accepted as an article of faith that the impacts on land use are less. So there's certainly a good argument for doing that. Housing typologies, again, you know, we've all been to the Build Maine conferences and talked about the buildings on the street and different ways to get different density and what the missing middle looks like and all that sort of thing. And this isn't that presentation, but the point is there are towns like Yarmouth and Freeport and others that have taken a good long look at this and come up with some really good ideas. But the one thing to be careful of here is when the designers are having the charrettes and talking about how important all these things are, you always got to be remembering cost, because if you put too many design standards in your ordinance that aren't necessarily related to cost and value, the developer's not going to be able to build them. And I think in Cape Elizabeth, the project in Cape Elizabeth that didn't go forward, where Nathan wanted the increased zoning to build the affordable housing project, and then that didn't go through and kind of fell apart. I actually had that land under contract. Nobody knows it, but I had it under contract after that for a little while, trying to make something work. And what I was going to try to do was stay within the existing ordinance and just stay away from the politics, and just thinking, wow, $900,000 for land in Cape Elizabeth, that must be a good deal. The deal must work. So put it under contract very secretly. Nobody knew, didn't get in the paper, which was great. And started working on the pro forma. And when we realized how prescriptive the zoning was with the setbacks, there's a big setback in the back with the requirement that the building footprints be only 5,000 square feet, and what the density was. They basically, through some standards that wasn't evident at the beginning, they had made the development on that site so prescriptive that you could only build one thing. And either that thing worked or it didn't. And the thing was the classic 3-story residential over retail building, and it could have been very cute and wonderful and even appropriate for that site, but it was so prescriptive that was kind of the one shot. There was no creativity. The big barn door loophole in that, I think, was that an educational facility was not subject to the footprint. So you come in and do a big giant school there, but everything else had to be 5,000 feet. If I'm misremembering that, I apologize, but I wasn't trying to do a school, so it wasn't really important. Here we are talking about housing typologies and growth areas. Now, this is more about density, but again, different housing typologies lead to different densities. TIFs, I think everybody here probably knows what a TIF is. If not, the person next to you does. Ask them after the show. RFPs and queues. We've responded to a lot of those. We're pretty good at it. We don't always win. We often win. But the one thing I want to put out there on RFPs and RFQs is that you really have to be working together as a community before you put one out. A lot of times, or several times, there's a community will have enough. It's good to say I support affordable housing when you're running for office, and then when you're in office and somebody wants to build affordable housing, it can be more difficult to support it and vote for it. I've had that happen to me before. But if there's not a consensus, a broad enough consensus, no one's ever going to agree. You know, no matter what I do, someone's going to show up at a meeting and say it's terrible. So I get that, and that's fine, and people have different opinions. But in your community, if you haven't worked on the underlying consensus to build, let's just say affordable housing, because we're talking a lot about that, and you know the committee is in favor of it, and the committee puts out the RFQ, and you go through this process, and you pick a developer, and then it gets to the council, and the council's like, you know, kind of does the fade, and then the town manager has to do the fade, because the town manager his job is not to be, his or her job is not to be politically courageous and fall on the sword for a real estate project. You know, they serve at the whim of the council, if you will. So they need to know where the politics are, and if they aren't there, they can't support it. So I've been in that position a couple of times where we've gone in, done a bang-up job, won the RFP, to find out that the support really wasn't there in the first place. And so that's a dangerous thing, and I don't know if it gives the town a bad name necessarily, but you know, we usually don't try to do those twice, you know. So something to think about to really build that broad consensus. And if you're going to put an RFP out, don't be fishing, you know. Think you can deliver on it. Think you can go all the way to the mat, even if it gets ugly, because us developers take our time seriously, and we want to do a good job, want to do good projects. But the best developers will demand something of you, just like you demand something of them. When we're interviewing for a job and we are being asked, you know, hard questions and good questions to find out about our motives and what we're going to do, we will ask those same questions of our partners, whether they be municipalities or businesses or whatever, because we don't want to work with folks whose goals aren't aligned with ours any more than you do. So it's the best developers will do that, and you should welcome it. So that's how the best partnerships develop.